Good afternoon. A good sunny, cold Ohio afternoon. At least that's where we're from today. And I want to thank you all for joining us. My name is Jessica Zavala, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health to today's webinar, Introduction to the Community Resiliency Model, Accessible Skills to Support Mental Health and Campus Safety. Before today's presenters are introduced, I do have just a few brief announcements to share. If you are interested in CME and CEU credits, they are available. The activity code for today's session is 02OWN, and so that's 02HONE. This code will expire on tomorrow at 12 noon. So tomorrow, January 29th at 12 noon. Please be on the lookout. Look as though Chris has already posted that information if you're interested in obtaining CME and CU credits. Next, we invite you to join us for February's webinar, which will be held on Tuesday, February 25th at 12 noon. We will welcome Brandon Bond from Active Minds as he discussed men's mental health. Also, mark your calendars and be on the lookout for details for the upcoming 7th Biennial Ohio Program Campus Safety Conference, the Evolving Landscape of Campus Behavioral Health, which will be held on May 15th in Columbus, Ohio. You may find additional details regarding upcoming events, including the conference, on our website and social media. We encourage you to post questions and comments in the Q&A and or chat function during today's presentation. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and the video will be made available for viewing on our YouTube channel. I'll turn it over to Madison now to share more information about our presenters today. Maddie?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am Madison Gaskell, Program Coordinator with the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health. And it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers for today's presentation, Drs. Ingrid Duva and Shelby Collins. Dr. Duva is an Assistant Professor of Nursing at Emory University and a Certified Community Resiliency Model teacher. She has a diverse background in pediatric nursing, school health, health systems operations, and nursing leadership. Over the past 6 years, Dr. Duva has taught CRM to hundreds, including first responders, healthcare workers, students, educators, and other vulnerable groups such as justice-involved youth. Her goal is to promote quality, accessible healthcare and advance resilience building practice across sectors. Dr. Shelby Collins is an adult nurse practitioner, certified community resilience model teacher, and adjunct instructor at Emory University's School of Nursing. She has extensive experience in community-based clinical settings and is passionate about improving healthcare for underserved populations, including healthcare workers. Her current postdoctoral work focuses on enhancing the well-being of healthcare professionals and students by addressing mental health stigma and improving on-campus suicide prevention efforts within Emory University's School of Nursing. So without further ado, I will pass it over to our presenters to kick things off. Thank you.
Hi, sorry for the delay. I was answering my own poll. Hopefully people will answer the question just to gauge how familiar everybody is with this model that we would like to introduce to you today. So you've already heard or been introduced to myself and my co-presenter, Shelby Collins. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started because I know it sounds like we'll be together for a long time, but for us, we could talk even longer. So let me see if I can share my screen, the correct screen.
And while Ingrid is doing that, thank you so much for having us. Ingrid, I don't know if you saw the poll that just popped up about how familiar the audience is with the community resilience model. 56% not at all, 41% a little bit, and 2% a lot. So we're excited to be able to introduce this to you today.
Right. So I can't do fast math, but maybe I was one of those 2%. So familiar with it. So I have been teaching this model since probably around 2018. I was first introduced to it while I was working as a school nurse. I have to be honest, I took an interest in it because I had 3 of my own children, and I had heard how important resilience was for children to be successful and happy in life. And so I thought, oh, I need to learn more about resilience. And so showed up at the class. It wasn't exactly what I expected, but I left just sort of passionate about how useful it is, particularly for the I don't want to say audience, for sort of the population I was working with at the time, which was school youth in schools, primary schools. So I was introduced to the Community Resiliency Model. It originated from the Trauma Resource Institute, which is located in California, and it was originated as part of a larger trauma model. So many of you who are attending this webinar are probably much more versed than me in trauma and post-traumatic symptoms. So maybe you'll see some of the aspects, or we will try to reinforce that it is a trauma-sensitive model. But what we're presenting to you right now is just actually a piece of that trauma model that can be used by the community because it's intended for laypersons, and it's intended to be used sort of learned quickly and used in the moment, hence the name community. So this picture on the left is the cover of the book that was written by Elaine Miller Karras from the Trauma Resource Institute. I believe there's a second edition that's available now. And if you're interested in this topic and want to read more and sort of bigger picture view. On the right on this screen, we do have an organization here in Georgia, a nonprofit dedicated to helping spread the model specifically throughout the state of Georgia. And we've done a lot of work across sector, as we mentioned. We consider ourselves sort of a byproduct of the larger Trauma Resource Institute in California. So without further ado, we do have objectives. Maybe you've seen these already. And so we'll try, oops, sorry. My screen's a little bit jumpy. We'll try to get through all 4 of these. We do not have any conflicts of interest to disclose, but for the fact that Shelby and I are both certified community resiliency model teachers, and sometimes when we're teaching, we do get paid. Okay, so I can't see all of you. I don't know how your day is starting out. We're kind of hitting that midpoint. Maybe it's lunchtime for some of you. But I want to kick us off in the mindset of the community resiliency model. And maybe you started your day today. You probably all have some well-being practices that you incorporate already as part of your life. Maybe you practice yoga. Maybe you started your day setting an intention, maybe taking a moment of gratitude, journaling. But and all that is great. Totally, we encourage that. And so I want to just add a little something to that and kick you off with a community resiliency model perspective. And that's to stop and take a moment and think about who or what uplifts you or gives you strength. So we all go through difficult times. And particularly if you're a student and you're enrolled in a program right now, you're probably finding different parts of that are stressful. With our work and our families, we have stress, maybe you have specific trauma, and who or what has helped you get through those hard times. So just take a moment and think about the fact that we are already here, so we know we're somewhat resilient, and who or what do we lean into? So just take a moment and think about your own who or what. Hold on to that, and we will circle back later in the presentation. All right, so sort of putting the end or the main goal of the presentation up front. This is a visual of the community resiliency model. It consists of 6 skills. The one in the middle is tracking. That is the most significant to learn, or the most pertinent to all the skills, is to understand how to track. And I mentioned that this is a very accessible model. It's easy to learn, but that's the key to being able to engage in the sensory awareness, is to learn tracking. So we'll spend some time on what that is and introduce you to the other skills. We won't have a lot of time, but that's what we want you to walk away with, is an understanding that those are the 6 skills. I probably won't cover as well as I would like all these skills while we're here together today. So I also want to recommend that you, if you have room on your phone, download the iChill app. The front screen, I believe this is the latest version, so that should be what you see when you go to your app store, what it looks like, because there are other sort of variations of this name out there that aren't necessarily related to well-being in the same way. So look for the iChill app from the Trauma Resource Institute, and we encourage you to download that, maybe multitask during this presentation, because the founder of the model will go over all of these skills and everything I'm discussing today in a slightly different way. And unlike myself, because I mentioned this is a layperson model and I am a nurse, but I'm not a therapist. Elaine Miller-Karras is a social worker and a therapist. And so if nothing else, just listening to the app, maybe while you're driving to work, tends to be a little bit soothing. She's got one of those voices that helps you sort of relax. Okay, so if you get nothing else out of today's webinar, I hope you leave with that. All right, so another component of this model is really understanding our emotional regulation and recognizing that we have common reactions during or after a stressful event. So these are the 6 identified domains. And just to get sort of the wheels rolling, I'd invite you to enter into the chat common reactions you see that would fall into the emotional domain. What sort of reactions do you see from people you're around, maybe family members, friends, clients, or yourself, when you're going through something stressful, or you've just maybe survived a trauma, had a death in the family? What would be in a common emotional reaction that you might see? Does anybody want to pop something into the chat?
So we're seeing denial, disbelief, crying, anxiety, inability to focus, anger, isolation.
Fantastic. So some of these categories overlap. So for instance, I might think of crying as being an emotional reaction. Sometimes we actually cry when we're happy or sad. Anger would definitely be an emotional reaction, something we feel when we've been through stress. But some of these, point being, is will fall into other categories. So for instance, what would a physical reaction be? Crying could also be a physical reaction. We have physical tears that, might roll down our cheek. Any other physical reactions you can pop into the chat box that would be common after a stressful event?
So we have stomach ache, fatigue, trembling, trouble sleeping, stomach pain, loss of appetite,
Fantastic.
tension,
Super. That
shaking.
you're thinking in the right direction. And I actually teach this model. We do some work with youth who are in the Department of Juvenile Justice, who are going to school there, and they're incarcerated. And one of our biggest barriers is that the children get in fights. So that's sort of a physical reaction to this stress. And so then we have to cancel our class. And then also I remember when I was working as a school nurse, we would get bombarded in the clinic by stomach aches that maybe weren't necessarily a physiologic origin. Spiritual reactions, again, feel free to pop in the chat and discuss amongst yourselves. But commonly we see people lean into their faith or the spiritual side. And then on the opposite end, we may see people move away from their faith. And then many other types of spiritual reactions might be caught in this category. Behavioral reactions, again, that could be fighting, could be a physical reaction, but it could also be your behavior. And so we see behavioral reactions. I don't know if any of you with yourselves or the people you work with have common behavioral reactions that you see. During COVID, we had to isolate, which was sort of a physical isolation, but then we also found people who maybe got a little bit depressed would actually emotionally and isolate and pull away from relationships. So there are also common relationship reactions we might see, projecting, and then thinking reactions. And I think a few of these were caught in the first round of responses, but go ahead and pop into the chat box some of the thinking reactions we might have when we're undergoing stress or recovering from trauma.
Confusion, analyzing everything, helplessness, racing thoughts, forgetfulness, overthinking,
Fantastic
feeling
audience we
hopeless.
have today. Thank you. So a lot of different reactions is the point. And we can get caught up in those and we'll discuss those more, but we also have these post-traumatic resiliency focused responses after a traumatic event. Stay with me, slides. That are on the more positive side of coping. And the first and foremost being resilience, which is what we're here talking about today and has been quite a focus for our society in the last several years. But there are others: strength and courage, renewed relationships. You can look gratitude. You can look at this list on the side and you can probably think of more. I want to stop and pause a minute on compassion, because as a steward of this community resiliency model, we do recognize that compassion is very important, particularly in our current social environment, political environment, having compassion for others, but also for ourselves. And some of you on this webinar, you're in many different roles. Which I forgot to ask Shelby. I wanted to find out what everybody did, but you're in many different roles. But if you're in a helping profession or a counselor or caregiving, certainly having compassion for yourself before being able to help others is really important. And sometimes those of us in the helping profession are the ones that are the hardest on ourselves. But for anyone, if we have to have compassion for ourselves, and that's a specific sort of goal of the model. Okay, so where did this community resiliency model come from? I mentioned that it came out of the Trauma Resource Institute as part of a larger model for helping people recover from trauma. But the skills themselves were initially used during environmental disasters. It was just a need, going to help people who had lost everything. And this is still happening now, because I just met with the Trauma Resource Institute yesterday, and they're spending a lot of time helping, since they're located in California, survivors from the fires. And for the most part, people physically survive these fires, but not so much emotionally when they've lost everything: their homes, children have lost their schools, the number of kids who went back to their home to find their pets had, burned. I mean, just devastating effects. So what can you do to help people get through the day? You don't have time maybe to use traditional therapies such as cognitive approaches, where you need to come back and sort of unwrap issues, but you need something to get through the day. And that's what this model intends to do: is in the moment, can it help you just maybe not what you'd feel like live your best life, but get through your life. And the great thing about this model is it is biological, and it's based on your sensorimotory awareness. So it's appropriate no matter what your culture is or your belief system, because we all have the same bodies and physiology. And so it's also appropriate across a lifespan, maybe used in a different way if you're a child than if you're an elderly person. But we have taught this model. We use it a lot with kids in schools, particularly dealing with emotional regulation, but also with patients who are elderly and have dementia, right? And have a different sort of understanding, but helping them focus so that they can settle their own nervous system has been very helpful. So I mentioned resiliency. If you all wouldn't mind, some of you can just pop into the chat box. How would you define resiliency? We talk about it a lot. It's a frequent topic of interest, but how would you define it for yourself, or the people you interact with or work with or help?
We have bounce back. Lots of things coming in. Being able to push through when times are tough, bouncing back from adversity, ability to rebound or cope with difficult circumstances, bouncing back after trauma, able to recover, collectively healing.
All right, so a well-versed audience is what we have today, very familiar with the concept of resiliency. So I want you to take it a little bit farther, and have you thought about community resiliency and what does that mean and what does that look like to you? Does anybody have a definition they want to offer of what they think community resiliency might be?
Healing and recovering together.
Absolutely. And so I think as I pose this question because I want you to start thinking about resiliency on the community level. Maybe you haven't survived wildfires with your community or lost what you identified as your community. But if you start thinking about it, we are part of several different communities, and we often do go through loss. It might not be as easy to recognize as Hurricane Katrina was in New Orleans years ago when they first started using these skills, or I think there was a tsunami that they deployed to help people. Might not be those environmental disasters that we can all recognize, but your communities may go through hardships and difficult times. And so think about the different communities that you're a part of and what it may mean to that group. So that's part of what we are trying to get you to think about today. So Shelby, I'm going to pass this over to you as you go through the main concepts that support the model.
Absolutely. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So things happen in our life, our thoughts, feelings, reactions move around in something called the okay zone. We have this natural rhythm, this ebb and flow of our nervous system throughout the day, where we can feel calm, we may feel relaxed, but we can also feel angry, happy, scared. We have this wide range of emotions, but regardless of what we're experiencing, we're able to show up as our best self. We also can call this the resilience zone. Next slide, please. So the resilience zone is a state of well-being of mind, body, and spirit. Our goal with CRIM is actually to learn how to widen your resilience zone. When we're in our resilience zone, as I mentioned, we're able to handle the stresses of life and experience wide range of emotions without being knocked out. Next slide, please. Some people naturally are born with wider resilience zones, where others have more narrow resilience zones. But the depth of our resilience zone can actually change depending on life experiences from stress and trauma. The more that someone can learn wellness skills, the more we're able to work on widening that resilience zone, which is what CRIM does. And this is based on the foundation of neuroplasticity, that by using skills to bring more awareness to sensations associated with well-being, we're able to actually create new neuronal pathways to increase those states of well-being and increase resiliency. We like to say that neurons that fire together wire together. Next slide, please. So sometimes life experiences can result in a person getting bumped out of their resilience zone. This thunderbolt might represent a stressor or a trauma that disrupts that natural rhythm where we're able to show up and operate. And when this happens, we can get stuck in the high zone where we might experience irritability, anxiety, anger, pain, some of those things that you all had mentioned previously when Ingrid asked about common reactions. Or conversely, we could get bumped into the low zone where we might experience depression, sadness, isolation, feeling withdrawn, or with children feeling really clingy. And we can actually bounce back and forth between the two as well. I don't know about you, but I can't see everyone's hands, but how many of us have felt stuck in one of these zones before? I know that I have. It's human nature to go into these high and low zones, but it becomes problematic when we get stuck there. When we understand the common nature of this, it kind of breaks down the complexity of trauma and gives us something that we can relate to, whether we're an adult or a child. And being able to recognize when we're bumped out of our resilience zone is sort of a core concept with CRIM. I do have a hand raise here.
Was that me? I think that was me,
No,
sorry.
I think it was from the coordinating center. Okay, next slide, please.
Okay.
So here are some common reactions to stress and trauma when we're stuck in the high and low zone. Once again, we brought up some of these things already, and it just goes to show you how common these reactions are as part of the human experience. This brings us together, but it also helps us to recognize that this really can impact every aspect of life. And as Ingrid mentioned, she gave the example of working as a school nurse. She saw a lot of tummy aches when there was anxiety within the students. I know when I worked in an FQHC, we would have a lot of people coming in with these vague somatic symptoms that really the root cause was related to stress and trauma. What I like about this slide is it kind of puts all of these reactions on like one picture where it starts to normalize some of this. And what's really important with CRIM is that we come from a place of non-judgment and depathologize a lot of the reactions that we have. We talk about coping or maladaptive coping often. As Ingrid stated, I am not a mental health professional. I am a nurse, but obviously this is something that we work with daily in the populations that we serve. But what we know is that sometimes people will lean into behaviors that may not be healthy for them, but it's really their way of trying to get themselves back into that natural rhythm. And with CRIM, we can use skills to give people healthier choices to be able to maintain that resilience. So, next slide, please. So the next concept that I want to cover is a biological model. And from what we learned with our community here today is there's a lot of experts probably in the audience that could really go in depth and detail about this. And I invite you to contribute as much as you want. But because this is the CRIM model, this is really what we teach to anyone who's learning the model. So we really try to distill a lot of the biological principles down so that they are easily digestible and people can understand them. Next slide, please. When we talk about the resiliency zone, we want to integrate some really basic, simple neuroscience information. And we want to help people understand the accelerator and brake of our autonomic nervous system. So our parasympathetic is our rest and digest. It's like the brake of our nervous system. And our sympathetic is the accelerator. When we are wound up, stressed out, or have an event that really freaks us out, with that we automatically pump on that gas. Some people are really good at using their brakes. Some people need a little extra work or assistance in using their brakes. And some people don't really even realize sometimes that they have a brake that they put on. But there's ways that we can learn to put our brake on. And when we start to notice the sensations that are happening inside our body, when we put that brake on, we're starting to associate with symptoms of well-being or sensations, of well-being, such as you might feel your heart be very active, racing when you're wound up and you're activated. But as you start to rest, you might notice your muscles relaxing, or you might notice that pounding in your chest goes away. And this is really a key concept in understanding CRIM and the importance of the skills. Next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on is the organizing principle of the brain, which I'm sure many people are very familiar with. The brain is a highly complex system, so trying to simplify how our brains function into general areas is a gross oversimplification. But that being said, it can be useful to think of the brain as a three-part system. And when we're teaching CRIM, we often use Dan Siegel's hand model. So if you'd like to join, you can put your hand up and we can practice this together as we go through the organizing principle of the brain. CRIM uses actually a bottom-up approach in helping others to understand this principle. And we start at the base of our brain, which is our survival brain. This is where our brain carries out fight, flight, freeze. It's unconscious. We do not have control over this, and it's responding to sensation. Then in the middle part of our brain, we have our limbic area. You can fold your thumb in to represent this. This area assesses risk. Your amygdala, which is housed here, is almost like your alarm system for your brain. And what it's doing is it's sorting and filing information and mediating emotions and feelings that are coming in. And then at the top, we have our cortex, which is our thinking brain. And when all three are aligned, our cortex fits and our thinking caps are on. And when this happens, when regardless of the sensory information that we're receiving, we're able to make clear judgments, think, and react in a calm way. But sometimes that alarm system can and we can flip our lid. And what happens is our thinking brain comes offline, and that's where we don't make the best decisions. And it's important for us to understand that, because when we are working with CRIM, we want to focus on sensations to actually soothe the survival network of the brain. And by working with CRIM skills, we can over time actually learn to override that survival instinct and get us back online so we can actually think clearly. Ingrid, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that or not.
I'll just say we use this, many of you are probably familiar with Dan Siegel, and if you're not, if you go on YouTube, he's got some great videos. He teaches, I think his primary audience is parents, but this works really well with youth. When I work with them, sort of they can see it and they'll recognize it, you know, and it can become a language. I'm going to flip my lid, speaks to everyone. But the other thing I wanted to point out is we do some work here in Atlanta. It's the Covenant House, and they're unhoused youth, young adults. But the model works very well with them. And when we teach it, they'll comment, you know, oh yeah, that's where I do math, you know, my thinking brain. And if I'm stressed out and in the classroom, you know, I don't have my thinking brain on, I'm not able to engage in the moment and, you know, be my best self. I'm not in my resilient zone. So like Shelby mentioned, oh, and this is, you know, morals and ethics can be a part of keeping that thinking brain on, so we don't make our best decisions or our best choices. Again, several of the audience, you know, populations I work with, we are concerned about the choices that they make so that they can kind of be in control of their destiny by making better choices. But anyway, so the skills that I'll introduce later, the idea is that we can bring some pause in and some ability to sort of, like Shelby said, override our survival instinct or our body's reaction to stress and cope with it a little bit better.
So one of the things that we want to touch on are the three types of ACEs. And many of you are probably familiar with ACEs study, which is one of the largest investigations to assess associations between childhood maltreatment and later in life health and well-being. But with CRIM, we recognize the three realms of ACEs, and these include household ACEs, which are the traditional ACEs from early childhood, community ACEs. And these are things that can impact us in our communities, things that like historical trauma, substandard schools, structural racism, violence, poverty. Those are all important stressors and traumas that really mold and shape not only children's brains, but also really impact adults as well. And then the last realm of ACEs that we want to address as well is environment. And those would be things like climate change, earthquakes, natural disasters, and we just came out of a pandemic. These things can all cause collective trauma and stress responses within our communities. We also, in talking about ACEs, want to talk about another study conducted by Bethel and colleagues about PACEs, which are positive childhood experiences. And what we found from that is that even with children who had higher ACE scores, those who had positive childhood experiences, such as feeling supported by friends or in their communities, a sense of belonging, having a trusting adult outside of their household that believed in them and supported them, those actually negated a lot of the effects of the ACEs. And that principle is something that we remember in teaching CRIM as we're cultivating our skills of well-being.
So Shelby, I'm going to jump in here
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
two more things I want to mention about, not to over talk about this busy slide, but two more things. As nurses, of course, Shelby and I are very interested in lifelong health effects that childhood ACEs can have on your physical and emotional, mental health throughout your lifetime. So therefore, so important that we recognize and address and sort of manage the responses to stress and trauma. But the second thing, based on, and I can't see the audience, but I can infer from the responses that many of you, there may be some students and some lay people on the call, but many of you are actually working in a helping profession currently. And so you're probably familiar with ACEs, because I find my experience is the education community is more experienced in understanding ACEs and the effects on the education environment than we are in healthcare, unfortunately, but we're trying to catch up. But people in the helping professions tend to have a higher number of ACEs on average than the general population. Why do I bring that up? Again, we often talk about putting the oxygen mask on first, like recognizing that we have to address our own sort of well-being and status and our own health, but also our colleagues, right? So we have to recognize that sometimes reactions that we get in the workplace and our and people in our work community. And again, I do teach nurses a lot, like having a little bit of compassion for maybe some reactions that we might not approve of, sort of due to either ongoing long-term stress or just coping mechanisms with stress. So I just want to mention that in case it's of relevance to those of you on this call.
Thank you, Ingrid. So adversity is not destiny. Through CRIM, we learn about the potential of our healing systems within our own body, such as the concept of neuroplasticity, which means that our brains have the ability to change, which can give us hope. We talk a lot about post-traumatic growth, which is transformative change, usually emotional, spiritual change that occurs after a traumatic event. So we like to remember this when teaching CRIM, that regardless of what happened in our past or whatever we faced, we still have the ability to maintain hope for ourselves and within our communities. And I also wanted to take a moment to highlight 4 brain circuits connected to well-being. These include the resilience circuit, which is the rapidity in which you recover from adversity, the positive outlook circuit, the attention circuit, and the generosity circuit. The thrust of this research from Davidson is that human beings can cultivate skills that directly influence the strength of these circuits, and the wellness skills from CRIM correspond to these circuits, and we'll be hearing about these shortly. So in summary, learning the wellness skills helps people realize that many reactions to stress and trauma cannot be talked away, but they can be sensed away. And that's that bottom up instead of top down approach. People learn that their symptoms are about biology, not about mental weakness. And this concept can actually result in a sense of relief and greater sense of well-being.
Okay, so thank you, Shelby. I can't see the chat box. I'm not sure why I couldn't bring it up, so I'll let you go back to that and interrupt me if we need to address any comments. And I do appreciate everybody's participation. What we have spoken about or covered so far, most of it has not been novel or new to many of you because it corresponds to so many of the different approaches that we use for supporting our well-being and recovering from stress and trauma. But what Shelby mentioned is what we're really interested in, this bottom-up approach. How can our bodies help sort of regulate our emotions, help settle our nervous system, help our mind? And that's something that we haven't generally spend as much time on. So these skills are about sensory motor awareness and gaining that so that we can use our bodies to contribute, so that CRIM can be this model that that you adopt in addition to other practices, or that you share with others in addition to other practices. The most important skill, therefore, is the tracking, because this is learning to read our body's sensations. Again, I go back to thinking about people who, counselors, psychologists, mental health professionals, educators, nurses. We're in these helping professions where we are really trained to think outward and what other people need, not so much what's going on with us in the moment. And so if we can learn to read the sensations in our body and sort of discern the difference or recognize them, then we can have some maybe some added control over making choices about what we're paying attention to, for instance. So what is tracking? I already mentioned this. It's noticing or paying attention to what's happening in your body at the present moment. Something that many of us aren't very good at, as simple as this model is. And then once you can start to identify it, and it can take time. Some people are really good at sensory awareness and immediately can start to track. For some of us, it takes a little bit of time. But the key is once we notice that, we discern is the sensation pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So for instance, if I'm a little bit nervous when I'm presenting and I notice that I'm starting to maybe sweat under my arms, or I notice a little tightness in my chest, I might decide that that's not so pleasant, so I'm not going to focus on it in the moment because I don't want to get caught up in the fact that I'm nervous speaking, for instance. Might take a deep breath and shift my attention to my breath, much like you would in some other practices, or to the fact that my feet are relaxed. And I might just lean into that because that would be pleasant or neutral. So really key is discerning the difference. And then once I shift away from those sensations that are unpleasant and I'm leaning into those that are pleasant or neutral, I'm going to want to stay with that. This leads to the sort of shifting the neural circuitry that Shelby mentioned. Like I want to focus on that pathway. So how do we do this? We encourage people to use this skill as a way of practice, not so different than going to the gym and lifting weights, right? We lift weights to get the muscles bigger. We practice our sport so that we can get better at it. This is something we want to adopt maybe as a daily practice, because anytime that we're leaning into those sensations that are pleasant or neutral, we're actually making an effort of widening our resilient zone or just actually being present in our resilient zone, which is feeding our well-being. So how do we do it? You can ask yourself these questions, or if you're with someone else, this is an invitational model, but if somebody's willing for you to ask and you just say, what do you notice on the inside? And again, I can't repeat enough that for some people, they're not going to notice something right away. So we sit with that. So no judgment. And then we ask those questions, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And those word choices are intentional because we're trying to keep sensations separate from maybe emotions or feelings. We tend to overlap those, but we're really thinking about a sensation, not so much a feeling. I might say I'm happy, but that's not what I'm interested in leaning into. I'm interested in leaning into maybe a lightness in my chest that accompanies being happy. So we call this the felt sense, and this is a very busy slide, so I hope it doesn't overwhelm anyone, but it's usually a favorite. It's a crowd favorite. This picture comes from a research study in 2014, which has actually been repeated. And the particular study dealt with about 700 participants. And the idea in this research study was for the researchers to evoke an emotion from the participants, and then the participants were to identify where in the body they felt activated. Okay, so again, not so much a judgment, but an activation in the body. And so you see that for the pictures, the yellow is the highly activated and the blue is less to no activation. And so they evoke these emotions telling stories or showing movie clip. And then the participants colored it in and they found this sort of universal response. And here are the body pictures that show these felt sense. So for instance, if you look at the top left of your screen, you see anger. Probably not surprising that when, something evoked anger, that it activated the chest and the hands and the face, right? So again, I go back and I think about the kids we work with in the Department of Juvenile Justice, and their first reaction when they get angry, and they can get angry fast, is to hit something. It might be the other student in the room, it might be their desk, it might be the wall, but they're going to hit something. And this is sort of a natural response. I mean, we used to hear it again in the public school, and the kids would head out to the playground and they were asserting their dominance. And you're like, oh yeah, put up your dukes. Like the hands were the symbol of that power and that anger that they might have. So you can see that. And, you know, maybe some of us aren't hitting things, but maybe I might yell a little bit. I definitely speak louder when I'm angry. Gotten that feedback from people. Why are you talking so loud? Because I'm mad, you know, and I'm releasing that energy. I'm feeling very activated in my chest and my face. So it's coming out, you know, and then maybe my head starts spinning, but hopefully that doesn't happen too often or in front of other people. All right. So that's activated, and you can look across the bodies over to the middle and we see happiness, right? So similarly activated, completely different emotions. So think back to when Shelby introduced the resilient zone, and you go up and down while you're within the zone, and you may have these different emotions, right? So the opposite emotion can still activate your nervous system. And so again, it's discerning the difference between the pleasant and the unpleasant, or just discerning that it is activated and acknowledging that. And certainly you've heard people say, I'm so happy, I feel good all over, right? And it is, these sayings come from, you know, these actually paying attention to our bodies. The body is the felt sense. You know, the weight of the world is on my shoulders. You've seen people like, you know, oh, it looks like your best friend just died. Oh, I've got so much pressure. So we do feel sensations of our emotions, but it's paying attention to those sensations in our body. And last thing, I know I've talked for too long on this slide, but I want to point out depression, because there's less activation there. And when Shelby introduced the resilient zone, and we talked about being bumped above the zone versus below the zone, I mean, we see people above the zone. Our mirror neurons definitely will pick up when somebody's agitated, you know, angry, and that's when we see people act out. What we don't see as well, or what we have to be more attuned to, are the people who drop below their zone, and it can be a lot scarier, because these are the people, and I know when we work in healthcare, we have screenings, and you know, they're not looking forward to anything they used to look forward to. They describe not wanting to get out of bed in the morning. They describe feeling numb all over. That's that lack of activation, right? They're just sunken in. And so in this respect, practicing exercises like such as the ones in the model, or you know, leaning into your well-being, is really to bump you back up into the zone, even if it's just momentarily. Anytime you spend in your zone of well-being is feeding, you know, your own health. So, and I know as educators on the college campus, which Shelby and I both do at times, this is something we work with other faculty and try to pay attention to, recognizing these less activated students who may be falling below their zone too often. All right, so easy to say, let's practice tracking. Let's practice. And let me get moving. Here are some sensation words that we can use. Exteroception, those sensations that we learned back in kindergarten. I can smell, I can see, I can hear, I can taste, I can touch. If we're not very good at sensing in, let's start with those sensations, because those we can recognize. So start with the easy, and then start to buy into like what kids can say. Oh, I feel a jiggly in my stomach. It feels all bubbly. It's a stabbing pain. So they are very good at describing their sensations, us not so much. But sometimes we'll feel a heart flutter, right? We get stressed. We can always focus on our breath. Is it deep? Is it shallow? Right? A lot of us have practiced that. So these words are just to build our vocabulary and remind us of all the sensory words that we have. And we want to learn these words. By learning them, we can enhance our ability to perform these skills. We can enhance our ability to recognize our sensations, again, that help us manage ourselves between the zone and feed our well-being. All right, so I'm gonna, let's see, I think I'm gonna stop here. I mentioned exteroception and interoception. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but interoception is that ability to observe body sensations in response to how we think, feel, and move. And it's well known that like superior athletes who are very good at sport and physical activities have great exteroception. And there's also been studies shown that they also have well-developed interoception and they can manage the competition, but not all of us do. And so this slide just explains interoception, sort of reading those physical states of the body. Again, we have these easy ones like temperature, feeling hungry, having to go to the bathroom, having a pain. So before we do a quick practice, I will say that for some people, particularly if you have a trauma background, this model has to be invitational because even sensing a pleasant sensation may trigger some unpleasant or painful emotion to be evoked. So always learning to work with CRIM skills is a choice. So I hope you choose to join me. Real quick, I want to demonstrate something that we can all do, and I can't see your hands, but we're really into the hands on Zoom today. We're going to put those hands together and we're going to pretend like it was Atlanta a week ago. We were not used to the below freezing temperatures. When we walked outside, we tried to warm up. So what do? We rub our hands together, right? Oh yeah, I gotta warm up. Now I'm going to rub them a little bit more vigorously. Let's get that fire going in our hands, rub them together. So I hope you all are joining me. I can't see, but once you get them rubbing vigorously, I want you to slowly pull them apart. And what do you notice in the palms of your hands? If somebody, not to ruin the experience, but can type in the chat box, what are you noticing in the palms of your hands? What sensation? Try to use a sensation word just for practice.
Vibration, pulsating, tingling.
Awesome. So vibration, pulsating, tingling, they probably are all describing the same sort of sensation.
Warmth, cooling. Here's some more temperatures coming in.
Great. But what I love about tingling is it's a word that you don't use very often. So you finally get the opportunity to say, oh, it's tingling. And then the temperature. So thank you that's the easy one, temperature, right? We all can recognize that, but you notice that it's warm and then it starts to cool. And you're really paying attention to it, right? And so it seems sort of trivial, but we're noticing the palms of our hands. Another easy one is rough or soft. Some of us who maybe have been gardening outside or working outside, we might have some calluses. I don't know. Some of us may be always just typing, so it's really soft, keeping the lotion on. Healthcare workers, it gets kind of cracky and dried. But you can also notice that, super easy. So what you just did was practice tracking. You track the sensations in the palms of your hands. Just a simple example of how to do it. But when you lean in and pay attention to that sensation, as simple as that is, you're growing your well-being in that point because you're paying attention to your body. If it's unpleasant, we'd say move away. If it's pleasant, we'd say stay with it. But that's the idea of tracking. And that's, oh, the sensory exercise. That was my cue. Why am I spending so much time doing this? Trying to expand a doorway into well-being. Many of us have mastered this whole thinking and the whole feeling domains, but this is sensing. If you can sense, you can resource, and I'm going to trot us right into there so we don't run out of time. But resourcing is probably the most unique part of the model. Some people liken it to visualization, but it's a little bit different than that, which we might do in healthcare. Maybe if somebody's going into the MRI, we might give them some visual activity to sort of distract them. A little bit different. It's called resourcing. And resourcing takes us back to that very first slide where I said, who or what brings you strength? Maybe something about you, maybe it's someone who gives you a sense of hope or joy, particularly when you're going through something difficult. That would be a resource to you. So we want to now attach the sensory vocabulary to a resource. And certainly this group of people, I can only judge that they might be friends or colleagues or students together, but they appear to be a bit of a resource, right? So look at the photo and try to identify some sensory sensations that the people in this group may be noticing if they paid attention. And what might be pleasant sensations that this group is noticing? Can we get active in the chat again?
Joy.
Super. Can you attach a sensation to joy? What sensation might they be having?
They have cheeks hurting from
Mhm.
smiling, laughter.
Yeah. Yeah. It can hurt to be really happy sometimes. So you feel the maybe the tight or the in the cheeks? What
I
about
noticed the warmth coming in through the sunlight, maybe if
yes.
feeling that sensation of the sun.
Absolutely. You can feel the sun on you. That's usually a welcome sensation for people.
They have touch and taste of food, fullness, warmth.
Fullness. They should not be hungry. I'm not, people always ask why they're eating pizza and drinking coffee. It doesn't go together, but they look pretty okay with it. What about the leaning in and the shoulders down? Do you think the shoulders look relaxed? Do their bodies look relaxed? Are their muscles loose, sinking down in their chairs, leaning in towards each other? So sensations of muscle relaxation, warmth coming from their group. All right, so great practice. Thank you. Back to your own resource. You should have more than one. We all have several. We just sometimes don't give enough thought to it, but it's any person, place, or thing, memory, part of yourself that makes you feel calm, pleasant, peaceful, strong, or resilient. And it may be because I'm a nurse, but I often lean into my own health or my own body feeling strong. I like to exercise. I find that athletes are quick to pull like strength of their legs, speed of their legs as a resource to them, something that they lean into and gives them strength. Um, but people are certainly a resource. Children, nature is very important. The beach, hearing a stream, water features can also be very calming for people and important. But I want to point out that a resource can be real or imagined, particularly after having worked for years with kids. We really leaned into the superhero idea, the context at the hospital I worked with our superhero capes. But just think about, you don't have to be a kid to lean into a superhero. I mean, who doesn't feel a sense of strength of being Superman and rising up above the city and flying and being Spider-Man and climbing tall buildings? It gives you a sense of strength, of sitting up, of filling in your chest, of capability. And it's not, well, I don't want to break it to anybody, but they're not real. It's imagined. And so it works for kids, it works for adults too. And internal or external, I talked about that. So with no further ado, let's get to how to do it. I would like to invite you all to practice with a resource. This is sort of an artificial environment, but this is something you can do for yourself. As a practice exercise, it's something you can do with others. And so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and participate with me. And most of you probably don't have a piece of paper. We don't use pen paper anymore. If you do, great. If not, you probably have your smartphone with you. You've got a notes page. So go ahead and participate by writing down one thing. Think of the one thing that gives you a feeling of calm, peace, or comfort. And so if you're pulling up your smartphone and you can't think of something that you want to use, often the screen on your phone is a resource. So for me, I gotta look at what it is right now because sometimes we change them. It's two of my daughters when they were in elementary school because that's when they were really nice. And now that they're in college, not so much, always not dependable. But it could be a resource. It could be a pet, a place that you've been, a vacation. So that's a good place if you can't think of one. So think of the one thing that gives you a feeling of calm, peace, comfort, strength. Now I want you to write down 3 details about that resource, but I want it to be sensory. So think about what you see. What is the color? If it's a scene in nature, is it? Are you seeing green flowers? Are you seeing blue sky? What do you when you think about that resource? What do you feel? The picture of my daughters and I, we had been on a hike and we were at the top of what we call Stone Mountain. And so it was cool and I could feel the air. So what could I smell? What could I taste? Get your 3, type them down, write them down. And now I want you to think about that resource and specifics about that time and place. Notice what is happening on the inside of your body right now. And it's not so much if it's a memory or past vacation of what was happening then, but what do you notice in your body right now as you lean into that resource? And I want you to pay attention to those sensations that are pleasant or neutral. And stay with those for about 15 seconds. So, you just spent 15 seconds in your zone of well-being, in your resilient zone, and you just invested in expanding your well-being. So, congratulations. Thank you for participating. It's a really helpful exercise. It's very intentional. And again, the idea is the space that you're bringing yourself into in this moment. And I can tell you, everybody has a resource. Having taught this model now for so many years and having the opportunity to teach with so many great teachers, I've seen this done so well. I work with Lindy Grabby. I think Jessica has met Lindy. She works specifically with homeless women. And in the clinic, it's a CAP-IN clinic that we're a part of through the university. She was dealing with a woman, this was several years ago, who was, I think, having issues getting medications, partly based on being homeless. So she was getting a little bit flustered and having a hard time engaging in the appointment. And Lindy said to her, well, how are you getting through? Tell me about a resource. What's something that's really special to you or gives you strength? And the woman mentioned the beach. And she went on to describe the beach, and Lindy engaged with her and said, tell me about it. And, she described hearing the seagulls, smelling the salt water, tasting the salt on her tongue, hearing kids playing, feeling the sand, the warm sand under her feet. And Lindy said, that's so wonderful. When were you, at the beach, or what beach were you at? And she said, oh, I've never been to the beach. I've seen it on TV. So again, not necessarily real for her, but real for her because that was her resource at the moment. I've also worked with kids who I thought might have no resource, and they would talk about the cafeteria lady who would also always let them get an extra with their lunch and say something nice to them. And that was a really important person in their life and sort of a resource for them to have that moment in the cafeteria. So you'd be surprised the number of things that can serve as a resource for different populations. Again, not to judge. Do you recognize that resources can have many natures? And this may have happened to a few of you while you were going through that exercise with me. For instance, a grandparent is often a resource for people because it's that parental figure that's non-judgmental and always there to support you. So lots of maybe good memories or good times with a grandparent. Well, if the grandparent has recently passed away, at that time, that resource may not be associated with pleasant sensations for you. And so at that time, maybe that's not the best choice of resource. And so we shift to a different one because the goal is not to ignore the difficult periods or not addressed issues, but not maybe in that moment because we want to practice spending time. Remember, it's like lifting weights and building muscle in that resilient zone. Okay, so a lot of you are working with populations. You want to help them manage their own emotions or widen their resilient zones. That's what we call being a community resiliency model guide. You just being with us here today, we hope that you immediately go try something out with someone. Just a few rules of thumb is that it's invitational, non-judgmental, right? We're not interpreting meaning. We're letting somebody lean into maybe a resource or a sensation for them. Again, open-ended questions are very helpful, giving time. and just sort of staying one step behind. I know that's my biggest challenge because I'm kind of always go. And sometimes I overstep someone's own experience because I think they're not engaging it or coming up with something. And so I start to fill in the blanks for them. So, yeah, we all have our own strengths, and I know you all are probably really good at this. Shelby, I want to take a second and I'm going to check the time. Does anybody have any questions about what we've been doing or concerns or anything in the chat box I should address before I go to skill number 3?
Nothing in the chat box. So I
Right.
think we can jump into grounding.
Okay, so grounding. What is grounding? Some of you probably already do this. I've met several people who do barefoot walking, which is a form of grounding. And sometimes at the end of a yoga class, you're actually grounding in your final position. But grounding is the idea that we have direct contact of our body or a part of our body with something that provides us support. Gravitational security is really important to us as human beings. If our relationship to the earth is not safe, then the idea that other relationships may not be safe or may not develop optimally. The key to grounding, though, as a practice or exercise, I believe, is that when we are grounded or grounding, we have a sense of ourself in relationship to the present time and space. And if we're in that moment, and this is where it may feel a little bit like mindfulness, if we're in that moment, we're not worried about the past or the future. And so it's a moment in which we settle our nervous system. And so you can do this in lots of different positions. You can do it standing, you can do it sitting, you can do it leaning against a wall. Often floating for people can be a sense of grounding with the water as the surface. I work with kids with challenges such as somewhere on the autism spectrum, and so they have a hard time sitting in the classroom, get a little bit dysregulated. Teachers use a lot of strategies like maybe Velcro under the desk, and so the child can sort of lean into that Velcro as a way to settle their nervous system. Fidget toys for people can help. So you can ground on something you're wearing. You'd be amazed the different ways that you can do this. So for now, since we're all probably in our chairs, maybe some of you are at standing desk, but I would like to invite you to ground with me right now. I think we have a minute or two. So I'm going to lean back in my chair as I'm talking, and I'm going to get comfortable. I think that's important first. And I'll be aware of what's pleasant or neutral in my body at the moment, right? So my feet are lightly touching the ground, very pleasant. This chair leans back a little bit while I lean into it. I like the support it provides my back. If you are sitting in your chair and you become aware of something uncomfortable, I would invite you to bring your attention to places that feel neutral or more comfortable. And I want you to find that comfort, that pleasant sensation. And again, we're going to spend a few seconds paying attention to that. So by grounding, we have just taken some time to be in the present with our physical beings, with some support from either the floor or the chair or whatever, maybe it's a desk that you're leaning onto. Can be a very effective way to practice and exercise while we're at work for those of us who do spend a lot of time sitting. And that's just a grounding exercise, can be done in many different ways. And maybe some of you want to pop in the chat box if you already participate in grounding in some way. But we put in the slides sort of those basic steps. And the best example I can give you of grounding in terms of bringing yourself into the present moment is the first time I had to do public speaking was at a wedding. And a friend invited me to, I don't know what it was I was reading, probably Corinthians or something. And I thought, no problem. I was pretty young and I didn't even think twice about it. I knew it was going to be up there for me to read. I walked up and I looked out in front of the people, and there was maybe 200 people at this wedding. And I think I forgot to breathe. But I remember thinking, this is what people mean when they say their legs feel like jello or jelly. Like I could not feel my legs and I couldn't breathe. And I saw my mom out in the audience. She looked a little bit horrified. But I tried to take a breath. But what I did was I leaned onto the lectern. Unknowing, I leaned onto the podium. That's, I think, why we have them there. And that sensation, that grounding sensation of support, allowed me to breathe, and it allowed me to start talking and get through my reading. And from that day onward, I don't try not to do public speaking completely unprepared. I have a whole new appreciation for the fear that can overwhelm you, because I literally couldn't speak or breathe. So those podiums are there for a reason. All right, so gesturing and spontaneous movements. Let me see, I'm at 112. It's like the very much the sibling of grounding. These are things that we do below our consciousness, okay? But these are gestures that have sort of emotions tied into them, and it can enhance sort of those feelings for you. So I've done this at work before. If I've been overwhelmed and somebody's come to me for something, my hand goes up. And might not be so polite, but if we're not in a judging space, we may recognize that that hand means for that person, I need to protect, I can't, another thing, right? That's my gesture. And so I may want to use that at times where, I just need to bring myself back into my resilient zone. We can also enhance the times when we are in our resilient zone. When we are joyful, we can use our body. And many people do. If we're excited and we're talking, we use our hands. And we have our own self-calming gestures. And so we invite you to use these gestures as a way to bring yourself into the zone. Maybe you need to calm down a little bit. You may need to just put your hand on your chest and feel your heart breathing and your breath, and just lean into that moment. But again, I acknowledge that these are sort of universal gestures that we do below our consciousness, but they can be used to self-soothe or to enhance a feeling of well-being. Spirituality, a universal gesture would be putting your hands together, regardless of if you're religious and believe in God, that this is a sign for people. And you can use that to even bring yourself into the moment, which many people do. Help now and shift and stay. This is a picture of a poster. It's actually on the door behind me, but my background is blurry. These are just quick actions we do that induce a resiliency pause, right? So it's a sensation awareness that brings our executive function back online, pulls our 3 parts of our organizing brain together. And this was a poster we kept in the clinics at the schools. So if we had kids that had completely sort of lost control, I can think of times where maybe somebody falling off the monkey bars, knocking the wind out of themselves, but not physically hurt, but now just dysregulated and can't, it's a bit of a hysteria now, and they need to get back into the classroom. We'll say, sit down, have a cold glass of water. And we're really going to lean into that sensation. And before you know it, you're noticing cold water go down the back of your throat. And that's what your attention is going to in the moment. And it helps you regulate your emotions. So it can be noticing sounds in nature. You can invite somebody to take a walk and actually count your steps. I actually had a nurse tell me this in a research study that we conducted, that when she was feeling a little bit overwhelmed by her patients or the families in the room or the acuity of the patient, that she would count her steps on the way in to make sure she had brought herself into her resilient zone before she had an interaction with her client or her patient. So just some examples, we have many more. But we call this sort of like a CPR for our emotions. Like if you just need a quick trick to get yourself back into that zone. And sometimes we find that we have to help people do that. Again, it's invitational. I know something we can try. Shift and stay, we've already done that. That's leaning into those neutral or pleasant sensations and staying there so we can reinforce that positive circuitry. You all are invested in your well-being and your resiliency. That's why we're here today. And that's why you're the part of your organization that you are, but you have a self-care plan. Think about what we talked about today. Is there just something that worked for you that you might be able to adopt into your daily routine? And if so, invite you to sort of commit to that or write yourself a statement of encouragement. But this is self-care for you so that you can take care of others. And then think about the community. Who is your community? Are the students that you work with? Is it your campus? Is it your colleagues, your family, your church community, your neighborhood? Think about the strengths that you have and challenges that you might run into by bringing a little bit of CRIM to your community. Because the way CRIM works best is if we learn, and we always are looking for new teachers. So there is a way to become certified to teach groups like Shelby and I have done today. But just learning a little bit about it and tapping into that sensory awareness and encouraging others to do it. Again, we have those mirror neurons. If we're able to regulate our own emotions, the people around us are calmer. If we're able to develop a common language, and we do this sometimes, I'm at the top of my zone, and I've seen the young adults at the Covenant House say this too, when they talk about flipping their lid or you're on the low zone today, buddy. It's a common language, but they're developing a community of self-care that's compassionate, non-judgmental, and hopefully bringing us to a state where we have better emotional regulation and more well-being. Don't forget the iChill app. Don't forget to act as a guide. Here's the app. It's available in English, Arabic, Spanish, Hebrew, Ukrainian. I think we might be missing a language, but they've been adapting it as we've had recent, like the Ukrainian war, and the Palestinian and the Israeli conflict, so that more people can benefit from it. So do encourage you to use that. And then Shelby, before I close out, have I forgotten anything super important?
I don't think so. I just wanted to touch back with the iChill app that it was free and available in other languages, which you just pointed out. So
And free. I don't know if I said free.
yes,
That's
it's
important.
free.
So I asked you to tap into your own well-being. I asked you to think about community resiliency, not just individual resiliency. And so I want to end with the founder's definition of resiliency, just to sort of circle back around to this community resiliency model. But it's that resiliency is an individual's and a community's ability to identify and use our individual and our collective strengths in living fully with compassion in the present moment, and to thrive while managing the activities of daily living. And that's our message for the day. Thank you for joining. I think the last slide is a little bit of the research we've done in case anybody's interested. But now we have about 10 minutes left, 11 minutes, and we have dedicated that to questions. So I think I'll let the coordinating center or Madison facilitate questions.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you again, both Ingrid and Shelby, for the fabulous presentation. And like they said, please feel free to drop any questions you might have in the chat or Q&A feature, and we'll take the last couple minutes here to address those. We have a question in the chat if we could revisit the last slide from the presentation.
Sorry, right.
That's okay.
Of course.
Thanks.
So I have on here, also, this is my email. I don't think I have Shelby's email up, but I can connect you to her if you're interested in reaching out to Shelby. Shelby does a lot of work, again, with campus wellness at Emory. So I'm going to let her mention that if we don't have other questions. But I also want to point out that we do have a website for our nonprofit in Georgia. And our goal with this website really came about during COVID, when we had such a high influx of requests for resiliency training for people because they felt this immediate need. And so we put the website up we have a lot of resources on there and ways to contact myself and Lindy. And we have, I think we have like 100 certified CRIM trainers in the state of Georgia that we tap into for different things. So that's a resource. Shelby, let me hand it over to you in case you want to mention anything about the work being done at Emory.
Sure. Actually, can we forward to the research slide? I think that's what they were interest
Oh, that
in.
one. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Well,
If
I
you
just
wanted
wanted
to
you to know
touch
how to
on
get in
this.
touch with us. There's a lot on this slide. I will tell you that the first randomized controlled trial was done in 2018 and published in 2019. And that was Dr. Linda Grabby, and she organized a research study with nurses because we tend to be good participants. But she gave a 3-hour session of CRIM because typically we like to do workshops where we can really practice. And the control group was a 3-hour nutrition group and did some follow-up surveys. And what she found is that there was a difference with the staff or the nurses who took the CRIM class versus the nutrition class in terms of reduced secondary traumatic stress, which is that sort of vicarious trauma that people in the helping profession can get, increased resiliency and reduced burnout. And the burnout is a big issue in healthcare, as I'm sure it is probably in education on campuses. But that was the first study. It was replicated with health and social service workers. And we've also done a study, was quasi-experimental with women at a drug addiction treatment center. I will tell you that was a very meaningful experience when we talk about stigma. And I know, Shelby, this is your area, but these women were so relieved to see that some of their addiction behaviors were not because they were bad people, but as a way of coping that had just gotten out of hand and was no longer really providing them help. And then the last study, I think that's mine. I did a study during COVID. And so we did a 1-hour virtual and had some very positive results. I will say that there's a correlation between positive research results and people wanting resiliency training. So, if you've attended this webinar, you're probably interested in resiliency. It's probably going to work better for you than a person who is a little bit resistant to it. But we are doing a study now with the youth in the Department of Juvenile Justice too. So that'll be interesting because they don't have a lot of choice in their life. So, all right. So a lot of talking. Did we get more questions?
It looks
Yeah,
like there's one more. Yeah. Go ahead,
we
Madison.
got one more question from Ryan, asking if you could speak to some community level strategies to implement this program or skills. And I'll add on to that. Maybe I'm specifically curious about campuses if you have anything you could speak to. Thanks.
Shelby, do you want to mention anything first?
Absolutely. So in terms of campus safety, just broadly, I wanted to comment that CRIM can be an excellent complement to any existing programs that you have on campus. And a lot of that is due to the fact that it comes from a place of non-judgment. It destigmatizes, creates a common language. So I actually found CRIM during my time as a student at Emory, and it was extremely helpful to me. And as I started sort of progressing in my career, I became a teacher because it's not only helped me, helped patients, helped my communities and networks. I really feel strongly that this can be really helpful, as Ingrid has shown here with this research, for healthcare workers. We know that healthcare workers ourselves, there's a lot of stigma in terms of reaching out for help and support. So this kind of gives us some bite-sized strategies to be able to tap into wellness exercises, and also too, one of the things that we find, at least among nurses, is everyone loves self-care. Oh, I'm doing self-care. I self-care all the time. Well, if we did self-care, we probably wouldn't be in the place we are now. Meaning that this gives people tools that they can use when they are, quote, self-caring, which can be really, really helpful. I don't know, Ingrid, if you want to touch on Arrow and our training through Arrow and spread.
Yeah, that's a good point. So
Yeah.
I think my fastest answer is it's very adaptable. So when we present it to a community, and we have to many communities like first responders, police departments, I mean, it's what do you need out of it? Because there are different ways you can implement it. And certainly we've introduced it into coursework at the School of Nursing where our pre-licensure students will get introduced to the model early on in their program. We have a HRSA grant that just actually finished. They're actually HRSA grant went out to, I don't know, it was like 35 different organizations, and I think 5 of them incorporated CRIM, one of which was maybe New Mexico. I think that might have been where you got in touch, where you first heard about the model, in the ECHO program, but we used it at Emory as a way to get to more vulnerable communities and send people from a specific community to become a trained teacher so that they could sustain it in their community and use it in the way that it fed them the best. I think the website, CRIM Georgia has a lot of examples of different communities that have adopted CRIM and how. There's a new article that just came out that's based in a school. It's not the North Carolina or the Asheville school system prior to their floods had already incorporated CRIM into their school system. I haven't done follow-up since the floods because it was a major crisis for them, but they had trained people in the different schools, and so it was part of their curriculum. So kindergartners came to class, and there's a resilient zone up on the wall, and they got to put their emoji of where they were in that zone for the day. So there's just so many different ways. It's hard to answer, but please contact us if you'd like more information.
All righty, we've got just a few minutes left here. I'll give one last opportunity to drop any questions in the chat. And while we wait and see if there's any final ones, just want to say thank you again to Shelby and Ingrid for your presentation and your time today and sharing these skills with us, and see if there's any final thoughts that either of you wanted to share as well.
I thought of one other way that we've incorporated CRIM. I think they've done it with nursing students, but also I mentioned the Covenant House, which is for homeless young adults. Weekly, we'd bring them a skill or a concept. And so it was like a 30-minute session. And so I just introduced that to mean like it doesn't have to be a 3-hour workshop with people. It can just be incorporating a skill. We've had units in the hospital who just have something in a staff meeting that they really quickly do. Because again, like Shelby said, it's complementary. It's sort of this new portal of awareness. So there's so many different ways you can use it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we got the chance to answer all of our questions. So we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. To our audience, feel free to reach out at opcsmh@neomed.edu if you have any questions, follow up, or regarding CME and CEU credits. And don't forget to join us for next month's webinar featuring Active Minds. So thank you again, Shelby and Ingrid, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.